He chose his career over his own child. He looked at the ultrasound photo in my hands and told me it was inconvenient timing. That same night, I collapsed in the snow outside his office and woke up in the home of the one man he considered his enemy. My name is Han Du-yun, and this is the story of how the man I loved erased me, and the man who was supposed to hate me saved my life instead. 3 days earlier, I sat in a private clinic in Gangnam, staring at a black and white photo that didn't look like much to anyone else. To me it looked like everything. A heartbeat. Our heartbeat. I remember laughing, actually laughing out loud in the waiting room, because for the first time in my life I felt like the universe had finally decided to be kind to me. I wasn't from money. I wasn't from status. I was just a freelance illustrator who fell in love with a man from a world I never thought I'd belong to. Kang Min-jae, executive director of Taesan Group, heir to one of the largest conglomerates in Korea. And for the last 2 years, my fiancée. I told myself the cold moments meant nothing. The missed calls. The distracted eyes. The way he'd introduce me to people as a friend instead of the man he was going to marry. I told myself that underneath the ambition, there was still the person who once stayed up all night with me sketching logo concepts for his first independent venture, before the board seat, before the money, before he became someone I barely recognized. I told myself a lot of things. I clutched that ultrasound photo the entire taxi ride to Taesan's headquarters. I didn't even call ahead. I wanted to see his face the moment he found out. I wanted to remember it forever. I got my wish. Just not the way I imagined. His assistant tried to stop me at the door, but I pushed past her, giddy, breathless, holding the photo out like a offering. Min-jae, look. He was standing at the window, phone in one hand, already halfway through a sentence to someone else. He didn't even turn around right away. Du-yun. Not now. It's important. I promise it's. I set the photo down on his desk, right on top of his files. I'm pregnant. I watched his face for the smile. For the shock even. For anything. Instead, he glanced down at the photo for exactly 2 seconds. Then his eyes drifted past me to his phone screen, to a photo of a woman I didn't recognize in an elegant hanbok, standing beside a man I now know was a political donor with the kind of influence that decides board seats. This is bad timing, he said. Flat. Clinical. Like I'd told him a shipment was delayed. What? The engagement is off, Du-yun? He finally looked at me, not with guilt, not with hesitation, just the tired impatience of a man handling an inconvenience. I'm finalizing an alliance marriage. It secures my position on the board. It's already been arranged. The room tilted. I actually reached for the edge of his desk to steady myself. Min-jae, I'm carrying your child. And I have a press conference in 11 minutes. He was already reaching for his coat. Then he stopped, just for a second, and looked at me the way you'd look at a stain on an otherwise perfect suit. You need to understand something. You were never going to be part of the image I'm building. You're a flaw in it. A liability I can't afford right now. A flaw. 2 years. A ring he'd promised. A child we'd made together. And I was a flaw in his corporate image. Min-jae. I'll have someone handle the details. He didn't even finish buttoning his coat before he walked past me, already dialing someone else, already 3 sentences into a conversation that had nothing to do with me. He didn't look back. I stood there in his office long enough for his assistant to gently, awkwardly, ask me to leave. I don't remember walking out. I don't remember the elevator. I only remember the cold hitting my face when the doors opened onto the courtyard, and the snow falling so softly it almost felt gentle, like it was trying to apologize for what had just happened inside. I put a hand over my stomach. It's okay, I whispered to no one, to everyone. It's okay, I've got you. I've got you no matter what. The snow kept falling. My legs kept walking. And then, without any warning at all, the ground simply wasn't there anymore. The last thing I remember is white. White snow, white sky, the white edges of the ultrasound photo still clutched in my hand as everything folded quietly into black. I didn't know, lying there in the snow outside the building of the man who just called me a flaw, that someone else was watching. Someone driving out of that same parking structure after his own tense, brutal meeting with Taesan's board. Someone who was about to become Kang Min-jae's greatest rival in every sense of the word. I didn't know his name yet, but I would never forget it. Episode 2, The Rival Who Saved Him. I woke up to the smell of ginger and rice porridge, and the last face on earth I expected to see leaning over me. Because the man crouched beside that bed wasn't just a stranger. He was the one man in Seoul that Kang Min-jae hated more than anyone else alive. The first thing I registered wasn't his face. It was his hands. Steady. Careful. Setting a bowl down on a low wooden table beside the bed without a single sound, like he'd done it 100 times before, like there was nothing at all unusual about a stranger waking up in his home. The second thing I registered was the room itself. Warm hardwood floors. Paper-screened windows glowing faintly with morning light. The quiet creak of an old house settling, a hammock I realized. Traditional. Grounded. Nothing at all like the cold marble and glass I'd grown used to in Min-jae's world. The third thing I registered was the fear. Because when I finally lifted my eyes to his face, I recognized him instantly. Everyone in Seoul's business circles knew that face. Sharp, composed, unreadable, the face that had been on the cover of 3 different finance magazines this year alone. CEO Chaewon. CEO of Nexus Innovations. The only man who had ever made Taesang Group's board nervous in a meeting. Min-jae's rival. I shot upright so fast the room spun and a hand, not rough, not forceful, just firm, pressed gently against my shoulder to ease me back down. You fainted in the snow outside Taesang's building, he said before I could even form the question. His voice was low even. Nothing like the sharp, clipped cadence I'd expect from a man who fought corporate wars for a living. You've been out for almost 2 hours. I didn't think it was wise to take you to a hospital where certain people might hear about it before you were ready. Certain people. He meant Min-jae. He knew exactly who I was. Of course he did. A man like Chaewon didn't miss a single detail, especially not the fiancé of his greatest rival collapsing outside enemy headquarters. Why would you help me? The words came out sharper than I meant them to, laced with panic I couldn't hide. You don't know me. You have no reason to. You were unconscious in the snow, Mr. Han. Something flickered behind his eyes, not pity exactly. Something quieter. I didn't need a reason beyond that. I wanted to believe that. God, some small, exhausted part of me wanted so badly to believe that kindness like that could exist without a price tag attached. But I'd spent 2 years learning that everyone in this world wanted something. Is this about Min-jae? I asked. Are you trying to use me against him? For the first time, something like restrained frustration crossed his face, quickly smoothed over, controlled, the way I imagined he controlled every boardroom he ever walked into. If I wanted to hurt Kang Min-jae, he said quietly, I wouldn't need to use a pregnant man half frozen in the snow to do it. Pregnant. My hand flew to my stomach before I could stop it. My eyes must have gone wide, because his gaze softened almost imperceptibly. The clinic bracelet was still on your wrist when I found you, he said gentler now. I didn't go looking for that information. It found me. Shame flooded through me so fast I felt sick with it. Somehow this stranger, this rival, this man Min-jae had spent years despising in boardrooms and headlines, now knew more about the most fragile, precious secret of my life than half the people I'd trusted for years. Please, I whispered, hating how small my voice sounded. Please don't tell anyone. I know you and Min-jae are. I know what he'd do if this got out before he's ready to control the story. Something in Chaewon's jaw tightened at that. Not anger directed at me. Something colder, aimed somewhere else entirely. You don't need to worry about what he's ready for, he said. Not anymore, it seems. I didn't understand what he meant, not yet. I was too busy shaking, too busy trying to hold myself together after a morning that had already shattered everything I thought I knew about my life. He didn't push. He didn't ask what had happened, though I could see the question sitting behind his eyes, patient and unspoken. Instead, he nudged the bowl of porridge closer to me. Eat something first, he said simply. Everything else can wait. No lecture. No pity. No cameras, no headlines, no cold calculations about image or convenience. Just warm rice, gentle steam, and a silence that, for the first time in longer than I could remember, didn't feel like judgment. I picked up the spoon with trembling hands. Why are you being kind to me? I asked again, quieter this time. Not accusing. Just tired. Just desperate to understand a world where someone helped without wanting something back. He was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes unreadable in the soft morning light filtering through the paper screens. Because someone should have been, he said finally. I didn't know as I sat there in the stillness of that unfamiliar house, spoon halfway to my lips, that those quiet words would end up rewriting the entire course of my life. I only knew that outside those paper-screened windows, the snow had started falling again. And somewhere across the city, Kang Min-jae had just realized I was gone. Episode 3, They Tried to Silence Him. I tried to leave that house 4 times before noon. By the 3rd attempt, my legs gave out before I even reached the gate. By the 4th, I stopped pretending it was about pride and let myself admit the truth. I was too weak, too dizzy, too hollowed out to survive on my own right now, even if staying felt like its own kind of danger. I didn't know yet that the real danger wasn't the man sheltering me. It was the one I'd left behind. "You should rest," Choan said, for what felt like the 10th time that morning, as he found me gripping the wooden door frame of the hammock, knuckles white, breath shallow. "I can't stay here." My voice cracked on the words. "Do you understand what this looks like? What happens if anyone finds out I'm in your house? Min-jae will." "Min-jae will what?" His tone wasn't cruel, but it wasn't soft either. Just steady. Grounded. "Punish you further than he already has?" That silenced me more effectively than anything else could have. Because he was right and we both knew it. The doctor he'd quietly arranged to visit that afternoon confirmed what I think I already suspected: severe anemia, dangerously low blood pressure, the kind of exhaustion that comes from months of swallowing your own fear until your body simply can't hold it anymore. "Bed rest," she said. "Absolute bed rest for the sake of the baby." I cried after she left. Not delicate movie star tears. Ugly, gasping sobs into a blanket that smelled like cedar and someone else's laundry detergent, grieving a life I thought I'd built and was only now understanding had never been real at all. Chaewon didn't try to comfort me with words. He simply left a fresh pot of tea outside my door and didn't intrude on the sound of my breaking. The photos surfaced 2 days later. Someone, a hospital staff member, a driver, I never learned who, had sold a single blurry image to an entertainment forum. Chaewon, one arm supporting me as we left a private clinic, my face pale, his expression sharp with concern. By morning it was everywhere. Nexus CO Chaewon spotted with mystery companion. Insiders speculate business scandal or something more? I stared at my phone with numb, shaking hands as the comment sections filled with speculation. Then names, then, worse, my name dragged up from some old public post I'd made years ago, my face circled in red on a gossip forum screenshot. Strangers dissecting my life like it was entertainment. I didn't know yet that this was only the beginning. That afternoon, 2 men in dark suits arrived at the Hanok gate. I recognized the Taesang Group pin on one of their lapels before either of them spoke a single word. "Mr. Han," the taller one said, his tone polite in the practiced, hollow way of someone who'd been trained to sound polite while doing something ugly. "Director Kang sent us. There are some documents that need your signature." He held out a folder. I didn't need to open it to understand what it was. "A non-disclosure agreement," I said quietly. "For everyone's protection," the second man added, his smile not reaching his eyes. "The pregnancy, the timeline of your relationship, any details regarding Director Kang's personal affairs, it would be best for all parties if this remained contained." My hands trembled as I reached for the folder, some small, exhausted part of me already resigned. Already calculating how much easier it might be to simply sign and disappear. "He won't be signing anything." I hadn't even heard Chaewon approach. He stepped into the doorway behind me, his presence suddenly filling the space in a way that made both men straighten, their practiced smiles faltering just slightly. "This doesn't concern you, Mr. CO," the taller man said carefully. "He is currently a guest in my home," Chaewon said, his voice quiet but carrying the unmistakable weight of a man who was used to being obeyed in rooms far more dangerous than this one. "Which makes anything happening at my gate very much my concern. Director Kang simply wants to protect his reputation during a sensitive time." "Director Kang," Chaewon cut in, his tone turning to ice, should have thought about his reputation before he discarded a pregnant man in the snow outside his own building. Silence. Even the 2 suited men seemed to flinch slightly at that. "Take the folder," Chaewon continued, "and tell your director that if he sends anyone else to intimidate a person under my protection, the next conversation won't happen at my gate. It will happen through my legal team, and it will be considerably less polite than this one." The taller man's jaw tightened, but after a moment, he nodded stiffly, took back the folder, and the 2 of them retreated down the narrow stone path without another word. I stood frozen in the doorway long after they disappeared, my heart hammering, my hands still shaking. Under your protection, I echoed quietly, testing the words, half disbelieving them. Chaewon turned to look at me, something unreadable passing behind his dark eyes. You didn't ask for any of this, he said simply. The least I can do is make sure no one uses fear to take advantage of that. I wanted to ask him why he kept doing this. Why a man with an empire to run, a rivalry to manage, and absolutely nothing to gain from any of it kept choosing, again and again, to stand between me and the people determined to hurt me. I didn't ask. Not yet. Instead, I simply whispered, "Thank you," and let myself, for the first time since that morning in the snow, believe, just slightly, that maybe I wasn't as alone in this as I'd thought. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the bare branches of the courtyard tree. Somewhere across the city, I imagined Min-jae reading a report about 2 failed enforcers and a rival who wouldn't back down. I didn't know yet how far he'd go next. Episode 4, the whole country called him a gold digger. By the time I saw my own name trending, it was already too late to stop it. I thought the photos were the worst of it. I thought the whispers, the speculation, the strangers picking apart a blurry hospital photo, I thought that was rock bottom. I was wrong. Min-jae hadn't even started yet. The article dropped just after midnight, timed, I'd later learn, for maximum reach before the morning news cycle. Exclusive. The truth behind Nexus CEO's mystery companion. Sources claim opportunistic ex-partner fled to rival company after being discovered. I read the headline 4 times before the words actually made sense. The article painted an entire fiction dressed up as fact. Unnamed sources close to Taesan Group claiming I had been a minor, forgettable fling of Min-jae's who'd grown obsessed with his status, invented a pregnancy to manipulate him, and when that failed, had seduced his biggest rival to secure a payday instead. There were screenshots of old photos of me at Taesan events, captioned with cruel, clinical speculation about my history of attaching myself to powerful men. By morning it was picked up by 3 more outlets. By noon it was on dispatch. By evening my name, my actual full name, was trending on Korean Twitter, sitting directly beneath a hashtag that roughly translated to gold digging illustrator. I sat on the floor of the guest room with my phone in both hands, unable to stop scrolling, unable to look away from strangers dissecting a life they knew nothing about. Some men will lie about anything for money. Imagine getting pregnant on purpose just to trap a Chaebol and it still doesn't work. Poor Chaewon, hope he sees through this gold digger before it's too late. Each comment landed like a small, precise wound. I wasn't crying by the time Chaewon found me. I'd gone past crying, into a kind of hollow, shaking silence that scared even me. He crouched down in front of me slowly, the way you'd approach something fragile, and gently took the phone from my hands before I even registered him doing it. "Do-yeon?" His voice was quiet, but it cut through the fog enough that I looked up at him. None of that is true, and every person who actually knows you understands that. Everyone else doesn't, I whispered. Everyone else just sees a headline. They already decided who I am. Then let them decide wrong, he said simply. You don't owe strangers the truth of your own life. He did this on purpose. My voice cracked. He's not protecting his image. He's destroying mine so nobody questions his. Chaewon's jaw tightened, something dark and controlled passing behind his eyes. Not the calm business rival from the boardroom photos, but something raw, something that told me exactly how close he was to abandoning restraint entirely. I know, he said quietly. And he will answer for it. But not tonight. Tonight you need to breathe. He didn't offer empty reassurances. He didn't tell me it would blow over or that the internet would forget because we both knew that wasn't true. Not fully, not for a long time. Instead, he simply sat down on the floor across from me, an arm's length away, present without crowding, steady without demanding anything back. We stayed like that for a long time, the glow of my abandoned phone screen the only light in the room, slowly dimming until it went dark entirely. It was well past midnight when I felt it. A small, unmistakable flutter low in my stomach, not pain, not illness, but something entirely new. I froze, breath catching. What? Chaewon asked immediately, alert, already halfway to standing. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. My hand pressed flat against my stomach, eyes wide with something like wonder breaking through the exhaustion of the entire day. The baby. I think that was the baby. Something shifted instantly in his expression, the sharp concern melting into something softer, more careful. May I? he asked quietly, nodding toward my hand. I hesitated for only a moment before nodding, guiding his hand gently to rest beside mine. We sat in silence, waiting. Then it came again, the faintest, gentlest movement, and I watched Chaewon's composed, unreadable expression finally break completely, his eyes widening with something raw and unguarded that I'd never seen on him before. His voice caught slightly. That's really them. Yeah. A small, surprised laugh escaped me, the first genuine sound of joy I'd made in days. That's really them. For just a moment, sitting in the dark on the floor of a house that wasn't mine, beside a man who owed me absolutely nothing, none of it mattered. Not the headlines. Not the comment sections. Not Mpreg or the board seats, or the entire fabricated narrative being force-fed to half the country. Just this. Just a small, stubborn heartbeat refusing to be erased. Let them talk, Chaewon said quietly, his hand still resting gently beside mine. Their lies cannot touch what is real here. I didn't know in that fragile, quiet moment that someone outside had already raised a camera to the paper-screened window, capturing the outline of two figures sitting close together in the dark. By morning that moment too would belong to the headlines. But for now, for just a few more hours, it still belonged only to us. Episode 5, Torn Apart by a Restraining Order. The photo of that moment, the two of us in the dark, my hand and his resting together over the small, stubborn proof of life inside me, hit the internet by 7 the next morning. By 9, Taesang Group's legal team had already filed the paperwork. By noon, a court officer was standing at the Hanok gate, and Chaewon was being legally ordered to stay away from me. Corporate espionage, the officer read aloud, his tone flat, procedural, entirely indifferent to the way Chaewon's expression had gone rigid beside me. And harassment of a former associate of Taesang Group. The petitioner is requesting an emergency preliminary injunction, effective immediately, barring the respondent from any contact, direct or indirect, with Mr. Han Du-yoon. I stared at the paper being placed in Chaewon's hands like it might rearrange itself into something less cruel if I looked hard enough. It didn't. This is absurd, I said, my voice rising before I could stop it. He collapsed me in the snow. Chaewon saved my life. This is Du-yoon. Chaewon's voice was quiet, but it stopped me instantly. He wasn't looking at the officer. He was looking at me, something steady and deliberate in his gaze, the same controlled calm I imagined he wore in every hostile boardroom he'd ever survived. It's all right. It's not all right, I whispered. He's punishing you for helping me. He's trying to, Chaewon corrected gently. That's not the same thing as succeeding. The officer cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable being caught in the middle of whatever this was. Mr. CEO, I'll need you to acknowledge receipt of the order. Chaewon signed without hesitation, his handwriting steady despite everything, and handed the clipboard back. Then he turned to me and for just a moment, something flickered behind his composed expression. Not fear exactly, but something close to it. The fear of a man who just watched the law itself hand him a reason he could no longer simply choose to stay. I need you to listen to me carefully, he said, once the officer had retreated down the path to file his report. This order doesn't change anything that matters. It only changes the shape of it. How am I supposed to? My voice cracked. You're the only person who hasn't lied to me in weeks. And now I'm not even allowed to be in the same room as you? You'll stay in the main house, he said. I'll move to the annex. The property is still mine, and legally, an injunction restricting contact isn't the same as restricting proximity as long as we're careful. My lawyers already confirmed it this morning. I blinked at him. You already talked to lawyers? This just happened. I assumed he'd try something like this the moment those photos leaked, he said simply. I wasn't going to leave you unprotected because of a piece of paper. I wanted to be angry. Angry at Mpreg, angry at the entire absurd, cruel machinery of a world where a rich man's wounded pride could summon a legal order faster than most people could summon an ambulance. But mostly, standing there in the cold afternoon light, I just felt tired in a way that went deeper than exhaustion. Tired of being something people fought over instead of someone people simply loved. The days that followed took on a strange, careful rhythm. I stayed in the main house exactly as the order required. Chaewon kept to the annex, a small converted studio at the far end of the courtyard, close enough to see the light in his window at night, far enough to satisfy the letter of the law neither of us dared to break. We didn't speak. Not directly. Not by phone, not through the housekeeper, not through any method that could later be twisted into a violation. Instead, every morning I found a small tray waiting on the porch outside my door. Rice, soup, a thermos of the same herbal tea he'd made the very first morning I woke up in his home. And beside it, without fail, a single folded note in careful, deliberate handwriting. Eat something warm. The doctor said your iron levels are improving. It rained last night. I hope the sound didn't wake you. I saw the movement from the porch light. I think they were dancing. I wrote back the same way, tucking my own notes beneath the empty tray each evening. Small things. Safe things. Things that could survive scrutiny if anyone ever came looking. Thank you for the tea. It helps more than you know. I named the sound they make at night, the midnight kick. I think they've inherited your work ethic. I miss talking to you. Even like this though, it's more than I've had in a long time. It should have felt lonely, this strange, careful distance neither of us had chosen. And some nights, staring at the annex light through my window, it did. But mostly, it felt like something else entirely, like two people quietly, stubbornly refusing to let a piece of paper decide what was real between them. I didn't know yet that while we exchanged porridge and handwritten notes across a courtyard neither of us was allowed to cross, something far larger was already beginning to crack beneath Kang Min-jae's carefully constructed empire. I only knew that every night, before I fell asleep, I found myself watching that small annex light stay on far later than it should have, as if the man behind it was fighting a war of his own, one folder, one phone call at a time, determined to burn Min-jae's control to the ground before it could touch either of us again. Episode 6. His empire crumbles, and he comes crawling back. The note stopped on a Tuesday. Not because anything had gone wrong between us, but because that morning an anonymous email landed in the inbox of every major financial reporter in Seoul, and by noon Kang Min-jae's entire world had begun quietly, irreversibly coming apart. I heard it before I understood it. The housekeeper's phone buzzing non-stop in the kitchen, her hushed, urgent voice on a call, the word Tae-san repeated so many times it started to lose meaning. By the time I found my own phone, the headlines had already multiplied past counting. Tae-san Group Executive Director under investigation. Whistleblower leaks evidence of slush funds, stock manipulation. Offshore accounts linked to Kang Min-jae raise questions over board legitimacy. Political donor family distances itself from Tae-san amid scandal. Alliance marriage reportedly off. I read each one twice, my hands unsteady, not from grief this time, but from something far more complicated, a strange, hollow kind of vindication that didn't feel like victory so much as exhaustion finally being allowed to exhale. Someone inside Tae-san had turned on him. I never learned exactly who, a passed-over executive, a disgusted accountant, someone who'd simply watched Min-jae discard one too many people to stay silent any longer. Whoever it was, they'd handed prosecutors exactly what they needed. By early afternoon, an emergency board meeting had been called. By evening, sources confirmed the political donor's family had formally withdrawn from all marriage negotiations, unwilling to attach their daughter's name to a man now facing a fraud investigation. The alliance he'd built his entire betrayal around had collapsed in less than 12 hours. He came to the Hanok just after dark. I heard the commotion before I saw him. Raised voices at the gate, the housekeeper's alarmed protest, footsteps moving fast up the stone path. By the time I stepped out onto the porch, Min-jae was already storming into the courtyard, his usually immaculate appearance unraveling at the edges, tie loosened, hair disheveled, eyes carrying the wild, cornered look of a man watching everything he'd built turn to ash in real time. Do-yeon? His voice cracked slightly on my name, something I'd never once heard in 2 years together. I need you to talk to the press. Just a short statement, that's all, that the pregnancy was always planned, that we're still together, that this is all some fabricated smear campaign. You want me, I said slowly, disbelief cutting through my voice, to lie for you? No. After everything. I need this to look controlled. His composure was fracturing further with every word, panic bleeding through the cracks. The board is voting on my removal by the end of the week if I can't stabilize the narrative. You're the only. I'm the only what? My voice rose despite myself. The only tool you have left now that the alliance fell apart and no one else believes your image? He flinched, and for just a moment, something almost like the man I used to love flickered behind his eyes. But it vanished as quickly as it came, replaced again by the same cold calculation that had stood in that office and called me a flaw in his corporate perfection. Chaewon stepped out from the annex at that exact moment, his presence immediate and absolute, closing the distance between us in a few unhurried strides. "You're trespassing on private property," Chaebol said, his voice carrying none of the composed patience I'd grown used to. This was colder. Final. "And in direct violation of your own legal team's request that you avoid contact with anyone connected to this residence." "This doesn't concern you," Mpreg snapped. "Everything happening on this property concerns me," Chaebol said, stepping fully between us now, his voice quiet but absolute in its authority. "And you have exactly 10 seconds to leave before I call the same officers who delivered your precious injunction." Mpreg's eyes darted between us, something desperate and disbelieving in his expression, as if he still couldn't comprehend how completely his control over this situation, over me, had slipped away. I stepped out from behind Chaebol before he could argue further. My legs were unsteady, my heart pounding, but for the first time in this entire nightmare, I didn't feel small standing in front of Kong Mpreg. I felt clear. "You never saw me as a person, Mpreg," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "I was just a project to you. Something to manage, something to discard the moment it stopped serving your image. But I'm done being managed. Dion, please. I choose my life now," I said simply. "And it doesn't have room for you in it." Something in his face crumbled entirely at that. Not remorse, I don't think, not really. Just the final, undeniable realization that the last piece of leverage he thought he had was gone. He might have said something else. He might have tried one more time. But the sound of sirens in the distance cut through whatever words were left, and within minutes 2 officers were walking up the same stone path the injunction officer had used days earlier, this time carrying an arrest warrant instead of a restraining order. Chaebol physically stepped forward as Mpreg attempted one last desperate lunge toward me, forcing him back with a single immovable arm. "You're finished," Chaebol said quietly as the officers approached. "Not because I destroyed you. Because you destroyed yourself, one lie at a time." I watched them lead Mpreg away in handcuffs beneath the same courtyard tree that had witnessed every version of this story so far. The betrayal, the notes, the midnight kicks, the quiet, careful distance neither of us had chosen. I didn't cry this time. I didn't feel triumphant either. I just felt, for the first time in longer than I could remember, entirely free. Chaebol turned to me once the courtyard had gone quiet again, his expression unreadable for a brief moment before softening into something achingly familiar. "It's over," he said quietly. I looked up at him, at the annex light that had burned late into so many nights, at the man who'd chosen, again and again, to stand between me and every version of harm this world had tried to throw at me. "No," I said softly, resting a hand over the small, stubborn heartbeat still fluttering beneath my own. "I think it's just beginning."
Episode 7. A New Dawn. Spring came early that year, the cherry blossoms unfurling along the courtyard wall almost a full month before anyone expected them. I remember thinking, watching the first pale pink petals drift past the annex window, that they looked like they were in a hurry to arrive, as if even the season understood how long we'd been waiting for something soft. Mpreg's trial moved faster than anyone anticipated. Faced with overwhelming evidence, the slush funds, the falsified stock filings, the offshore accounts his own former employees had finally found the courage to expose, his legal team pushed for an early plea in exchange for a reduced sentence. The board didn't wait for the verdict to strip his title. By the time the gavel came down, Kong Mpreg was already nothing more than a name in a closing news cycle, a cautionary headline people would forget by summer. I didn't watch the sentencing. I didn't need to. Some chapters don't require an ending you witness firsthand to know they're truly closed. Chaebol's company, meanwhile, seemed to breathe easier with every month that passed. Without Tayson's aggressive, ethically hollow tactics dominating headlines, Nexus Innovations quietly absorbed 2 of the contracts Mpreg's scandal had left behind, not through manipulation, but simply because, for the first time in years, clients trusted a company that hadn't needed to lie to succeed. "You could gloat a little," I told him once, watching him read yet another quarterly report with the same quiet focus he gave everything. "You earned it." "I'd rather earn something else," he said, setting the report down, his eyes finding mine with a warmth that still, even now, occasionally caught me off guard. I didn't ask what he meant. I think, by then, I already knew. The injunction dissolved the same week Mpreg's plea was finalized, and the first thing Chaebol did, the very first thing, before board meetings, before press statements, before anything else waiting for his attention, was walk across that courtyard and knock gently on my door, as though he needed permission all over again for something that had never really stopped being true. "I believe," he said when I opened it, something almost boyish in his usually composed expression, "I'm no longer legally required to leave notes on the porch." I laughed, a real laugh, unguarded, the kind I hadn't let myself have in months. "I kind of like the notes." "Then I'll write you one every day for the rest of my life," he said, quiet and certain, "in addition to everything else I intend to say to your face." I didn't cry easily anymore. The year had worn that particular reflex thin. But something about the steadiness in his voice, the total lack of performance in it, undid me more gently than any grand declaration could have. I went into labor on a soft, overcast morning in early April, 3 weeks before the cherry blossoms finally let go of their branches entirely. Chaewon didn't leave my side once, not during the frightened hours in the early morning, not during the long, exhausting stretch that followed, not even when the nurses gently suggested he might want to step out for air. He simply held my hand, steady as he'd always been, murmuring quiet reassurances until the room finally, suddenly, filled with the sound of a small, furious cry. "A boy," the doctor said, lifting him just enough for us both to see. "Healthy, loud. Definitely inherited the midnight kicks," I managed, half laughing, half sobbing, utterly wrecked in the best possible way. Chaewon's composure, the same unreadable calm that had unsettled boardrooms and rivals alike for years, broke completely the moment they placed our son in his arms. I watched something in him soften permanently, irreversibly, as he looked down at that small, wrinkled face like it was the single most important merger he'd ever close. "Hello," he whispered, voice rough with an emotion I'd never once heard from him in all our months together. "I already promised you I'd be here." I meant it. We named him Seo Hyul, Sky, because, as Chaewon put it, he'd arrived exactly when the world finally felt open again. Months later, sitting in the same courtyard where an injunction had once forced us apart, where notes had once been our only language, where Min-jae had once stood screaming his last, desperate demands beneath a bare winter tree, I watched that same tree now heavy with soft pink blossoms, petals drifting lazily across the stones where Chaewon sat, our son sleeping peacefully against his chest. "Do you ever think about it?" I asked quietly. "How different this all could have gone?" "Every day," he admitted, brushing a stray petal from Hyul's blanket. "But I don't dwell on it. I'd rather spend that time being grateful for how it actually did." I settled beside him, resting my head against his shoulder, watching the last of winter's grip finally, completely dissolve into spring. "Me too," I whispered. Outside the Hanok walls, the city moved on exactly as it always had. New scandals, new headlines, new names briefly trending before fading into forgotten history. Min-jae's name was already one of them, a cautionary tale people would mention less and less as the years went on. But inside those walls, in the quiet, sun-warmed courtyard where everything had once fallen apart and then, slowly, impossibly, come back together, none of that mattered anymore. We had built something steadier, something real, and as the cherry blossoms drifted gently over the three of us, I finally, fully believed what Chaewon had told me on that very first morning, over a bowl of warm porridge in a house that would one day become our home. Someone should have been kind to me. Someone finally was.